it's all pre-taped.
Hi, this is Diane, Director of Arlington Public Library, welcoming you live from Diane's living room, except we're not live, but we are local. And today we're joined by Arron Gregory, who is the newly appointed chief, and I'm going to read it so that I don't mess it up, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for Arlington Public Schools. Welcome, Arron.
Thank you.
And you come to us by way of Ohio, is that correct?
Correct. So I'm from Columbus, Ohio, and I've been in Arlington now for a year. Just reached my 1-year anniversary in January.
And what an amazing year it has been. Who wants to start a job in the middle of a global pandemic? I've actually been to Columbus. OCLC might still be there, their headquarters there. I was there a number of times, in another life, I worked for a different library system. So welcome. Tell me a little bit about your role, because as I understand it, it's a brand new one for Arlington Public School.
Sure. So the Chief Diversity Officer position is a brand new role for Arlington Public Schools. And it really began out of my understanding, there was an equity infrastructure assessment that was done by George Mason several years ago. They issued a report, and one of the recommendations was the creation of a Chief Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Officer position, feeling that Arlington Public Schools was ready for such a position to move and advance the work of diversity and equity and inclusion for APS.
Okay, so somebody who might not be familiar with all of those terms, because they might mean something different to each of us, what does it mean to you? What does that title and some of those words mean to you and how you approach your job?
Sure. So it's a really very strategic position. It's a position in terms of really looking across the whole ecosystem of Arlington Public Schools, from staff as well as students, and looking at it from a diversity lens, an equity lens, and as well as an inclusion lens. And really, it's really about shifting mindsets.
Okay.
So I'm more of a strategist in terms of the strategic vision for diversity, equity, inclusion for APS. I sit alongside the superintendent and cabinet with them and seeing where everyone has a role and everyone fits. So this position really isn't a position where one person owns the equity work within a school division. Is one that we all take ownership over.
Mm-hmm. And you were doing this kind of work, if I'm not mistaken, when you were in Ohio.
I was. So I started out at the state level, and I was in special ed. So I oversaw the department in special ed that oversaw due process hearings and due process, which is more legalistic, and quickly found out that really we have to work together to really build inclusive schools and not be adversarial. So I moved more in towards transitioning to how do we do more alternative dispute resolution, mediations, having families work with the schools, because everyone has the same goal in mind, which is student outcomes and performance. And then I transitioned into an area that was closest and nearest dear to my heart in terms of closing the achievement gap. And I was alongside leadership there to really work in the office around closing the achievement gap. Well, with the shift in culture and changes, they said, hey, we need to make this a little bit more robust in terms of school improvement work. So I started leading some of the work and working in the state around that. And I wanted to get closer to the work. So I found myself working in some school systems and really making some gains in terms of how do we close those gaps in performance for all of our students.
So what were some of the strategies that you used to close the gap?
Sure. So the main strategy was really looking at how do we structure school improvement work alongside of our collaborative learning teams, is what they call them here. In Ohio, we had the Ohio Improvement Process, which is really centered around the same structure of professional learning communities, and making sure that there was accountability and leadership at every level to do a needs assessment. And then from our needs, we developed a plan and a plan of action in terms of how do we close those performance gaps. And oftentimes we don't really want to talk to them in terms of an achievement gap, but more so around opportunity gaps, more so around, the gaps that are opportunity gaps, which wind up leading to learning loss and learning gaps for students. So really developing those high yield strategies, making sure that we have restorative practices in place around student discipline, making sure that we utilize universal design for learning, which is multiple means of engagement, expression, and representation, because learning looks different for every student, and we need to
Sure.
differentiate how we plan for those lessons.
Okay, and do you also work with the parents to encourage them to encourage certain behaviors for the student to optimize the learning experience?
Sure. So one of the things the superintendent wanted to do is that he felt the need that there needed to be staff within the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And a perfect fit is our Family and Community Engagement Specialist. So FACE, Family Community Engagement, actually lies within my office, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And we have one Family and Community Engagement Specialist within DEI that really sets the tone for that work. And it's very important work, because you cannot have diversity, equity, and inclusion work without having a good, balance between home and school.
Right. And how are you drawn to this work to begin with? What attracted you to this field?
Good question. So I think that my journey in championing equity work started with my own path and my own journey. I grew up in a school system where I never saw a teacher that looked like me. There was no windows and no mirrors for me. And I remember, I tell this story and it still gives me chills, but I remember running home in middle school and I saw my first Black male teacher, not knowing that he was a substitute for the day. But I was so excited to see someone that represented and looked like myself that I couldn't wait to get home to tell my parents. And along that prompted me to go to a historically Black university and college for undergrad. And that was the first time I ever had a professor or a teacher that actually was a Black male or even a Black female that ever taught me. And I think that kind of prompted me along my journey of considering equity and what do students need, and not just looking at student performance, but do they have reflections? And how can we help build an inclusive environment and one that encompasses cultural competency? So I think that was really my path to the world of education.
Okay, so now you're in Arlington, and as I said a minute ago, you arrived at a critical time in the middle of a global crisis. And what have been your sort of early impressions of the task that's ahead of you? Like, what are the things that might be keeping you up at night because, like, wow, there's so much work to be done, and how do we get there? And I don't know, just again, first impressions.
So if you talk to my family, they'll say there's a lot that keeps me up at night. So that's not necessarily a good thing, but of course, trying to manage the pandemic, not really knowing where our students are in terms of their learning, in terms of those gaps and the learning loss that has been exacerbated by COVID-19. What does that look like for all of our students? Because all students have needs, but some students have greater needs.
Sure.
And when we look at privilege, and when we look at there are some students that haven't skipped a beat, that are performing well, some students that have had advantages of having tutors still,
right?
Students that have had advantages of having, tutoring and other services, and there have been some students that have not. So that, how do we close that? How do we look at our limited time? But then also, how do we build in regression and recoupment into our everyday learning? So you can't scaffold back when a fourth grader, we have to teach on that level. But how do we build in the necessary skills that they may have missed? And then also, I would say, having open and honest conversations in Arlington, that we are a microcosm of the rest of the world that's dealing with a lot of tough issues right now around race, racism, and some of those other isms. Are we really having the challenging conversations that we have to have in order to move forward with the work? And how do we do that? We're also Arlington County, and I have a counterpart at Arlington County, and the focus on Arlington has been around racial equity.
Sure.
Whereas the focus of APS has been on equity, and equity in a much broader sense. So how do we become better aligned with the county work and our efforts to make sure that we have one vision and that we have an absolutely focused goal. So those are the same things that kind of keep me up at night.
So you're talking about Samia Bird, who is
Correct.
also relatively new in your position, and she's been working, I guess, more at the kind of strategic planning level for most of the last year. She's a colleague of mine with the county manager's executive team. But talk a little bit of ways that we can, and not just the library, because we'll get to that, but ways the county and the schools can work more collaboratively. I know that's a goal. Everybody wants the same thing. We want healthy, responsive, welcoming students who are open to one another in ways that, for example, weren't possible when I was coming through school in Arlington 1,000 years ago. And I don't want you to be, too worried about what it looks like administratively, but what would be, for you being fairly new to this community, an important first step to say, this is how I'd like to get on the same page with the county on pursuing racial equity issues?
Sure. So I can talk a little bit about the work that me and Samia are doing.
Okay.
We do have a partnership, and we're using Volunteer Arlington
Okay.
to help look at our equity policy, and APS has an equity policy, and Arlington County has equity resolution.
Mm-hmm.
How can we how do we align the work, and also are asking for recommendations as an outcome by this core group that we have established to be an outside neutral party, and to see where there is alignment, see where there's misalignment, and also see where there are some best practices across the country, because there are other counties that are doing this work as well. So can we bring
Sure.
that into the fold? So I think that's a very beginning and a start. Um, Arlington County uses GARE, the Governmental Alliance on Racial Equity, and
Right.
work a GARE. Well, how can we bring in APS, Arlington Public School Board, to also hear the same message that the county has heard through GARE?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's some natural alignments there. Funding is always a big piece too, and I know there's
Mm-hmm.
going to be additional funding probably that the federal government is going to allocate to county level government. So then, really talking about what are the needs, what are the infrastructure needs to make sure that the digital divide closes.
Mm-hmm.
Because in my mind, everyone should have living room service of internet access, right?
Right.
And that's going to be something that's crucial for library services. That's
Sure.
crucial in terms of building our infrastructure. So I think it's just more conversation, but we're going to have to take those conversations to actions, and
Right.
developing an action plan together. And then also, how do we align our collective impact? What are
Right.
the resources out there? Because Arlington is rich in resources. We have a lot of major corporations, and we need to bring them into the fold, so
Mm-hmm.
that we start looking at education not just as until K-12 graduation, but beyond. It's
Mm-hmm.
about career. So how can we go from cradle to career? And then also look at those early learners and those K2 before they even get to preschool, and
Mm-hmm.
making sure that they're off to a great start. And I think we have partnerships with Destination 2027 and
Right.
all those other partnerships that we have. But now, how do we focus that and focus our, and so we can have a greater collective impact?
So there is a lot, you've probably noticed there are lots of activists in Arlington of all varieties. And I know I no longer have a student in the school system. My son is a bit older now. Uh, but redistricting is a hot topic. And redistricting, I'm sure, touches on race and privilege and comfort and inclusion and all those other things as we talk about where we want our children to go to school and who we want their classmates to be, et cetera. I'm curious, again, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I will. How open how open do you think Arlington, I'm not talking about school board or county board, the citizens, the residents of Arlington, how open do you think they are to having those challenging conversations around race and privilege and, calling it out, for lack of a better phrase? And I worry that until we say, this is where we are and this is where we need to be, we'll be putting a lot of nice language around good intentions, but we might not see the results that I think we could otherwise achieve. What do you think?
I think we have a long way to go. We need to understand what racism is and what anti-racism is.
Mhm.
And that spectrum and what it looks like. Are we actively calling out racist behaviors and racism that we see? Are we being bystanders or are we being allies?
Okay.
But I guess the first step is admitting that you have a problem. And I'm not sure if we fully admitted that, even though we're Arlington, even though it's progressive, even though that there's a problem.
Mhm.
That's a national problem, but it's also an Arlington problem. There's structural problems and institutionalized problems that are coming to light that the federal government is now trying to address, that the state has a brand new plan on equity,
Mhm.
that the VDOE has an office dedicated to the Virginia Department of Education, has
Mhm.
an office dedicated, that Virginia as a whole has a diversity person, and it's the first of their kind in the country. So
Wow,
if it's not us, who?
that's
Um,
great.
so I think that we have to better align, and then we have to have these conversations. I know that Samia Bird is doing that with the dialogue on racial equity that
Mhm.
we're a part of. We've been a partner in that, but we have to do more. Over the summer, we had a community talk called "Let's Talk" about racism and what was happening with the country at the time. But we
Mhm.
have to. It can't be one-offs. These have
Right,
to be continual conversations. So it's a are we there yet? No.
right.
Um, but every step that we take, I think we get one step closer. So I think we just have to continue the conversation, but then we also have to follow with actions. The superintendent will say that equity is a verb. That means you have to do something.
Mhm.
So what are we going to commit to is really the question that we have. And how does racism operate here? How does ableism operate here? How
Mhm.
does sexism operate here? All those isms, how do they operate here? Not if they operate, but how do they operate? I think
Oh,
is the
yeah,
question we have to ask.
right. I think that's a great distinction. Uh, I mentioned the activism. There's the if there's if there are enough opportunities for bringing other voices into the room.
So I believe with certain communities, you have to take a grassroots efforts. You have to go to them. You can't put it into an email and expect for them to come. And oftentimes we say, well, we let you know, where are you? But that's not the way this works.
Right.
When you have to be authentic, and there's something called authentic communication and authentic family and parent engagement. So you have to go to the neighborhoods. You have to walk the neighborhoods. You have to go to the churches. You have to walk the churches. You have to go to the barber shops. You have to go to the hair salons. And it's
Right.
been a challenge, of course, with COVID. And I hope that things open up. But I believe that my role and my part is to be visible in the community and hear from the community. So I utilize the 3 L's, which is, and this year I went on a listening tour, but I'm always going to listen. So I
Mhm.
want to listen, I want to learn, and I want to lead.
Okay.
And that's been a challenge, but I think that we have to engage the communities and all of the communities. Oftentimes we talk about our Spanish speaking populations, but there are way more languages than English and Spanish that are within Arlington.
Sure.
And we need to communicate at the level and let them know that we want to hear their voices.
Sure. So I love that LLL. I'm gonna commit it to memory, but I will only say I got it from you. I will not claim it as my own. But how about the students? How do they feel about the emphasis on race and equity? I think shortly before you got here, there was a fairly controversial thing in the community about renaming Washington Liberty High School. I grew up in Arlington, so it's still I have to catch myself and call it Washington Liberty as opposed to Washington Lee. But the students themselves, how do they feel about this emphasis on race and equity and diversity? Are they we've heard this stuff before, we're going to wait and see, or do you have some students who are all in and ready to help you lead?
Sure. So I haven't been able to engage with students the way I would like. And I'm hoping that now as we transition, we just started our middle school
Yes.
is coming back, and then our high schools students will be coming back. There are leaders there within the buildings that are always ready, but they want to make sure that this work is not performative.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was doing the Let's Talk, that came out loud and clear was like, is this going to be another conversation, because we're ready for action and
Okay.
ready for things to change.
Okay.
Um,
No,
so
yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, no, no. I was going to say that I think that that's where a lot of students are. They're ready to petition. They're ready. I mean, we saw the streets filled with folks that were protesting.
Right.
The tragic, and I call it murder. I mean, I got in trouble for saying the word murder, and I was like, well, what else would you want me to call it? Of George Floyd, not trouble,
Sure.
but folks had questions about that, and I was like, well, we can call it homicide. So I'll say the homicide of
Yeah.
George Floyd, if that makes everyone feel better. I think that caused a lot of social actions and social justice for social change. And we've been talking to our students about that. So I think the folks are ready, but I think we have some that are ready to engage. I think that we have some that are wait and see. And I think we always have anchors too. So
Mhm.
we need to move the ones that are ready to say wait and see, as long as they know that we're committed to action. And I think we're starting to get that level of engagement to where folks are seeing that new leadership is here, and they're ready to commit to hearing our voices and taking actions upon what it is that needs to be changed. So I'm very encouraged.
Well, I mean, even that just example that you just gave, because I believe the George Floyd trial is underway now in Minneapolis. Just the way you referred to it as murder, it offended somebody. I mean, isn't that part of the journey, though, that we have to just acknowledge that we're going to see things differently, and it's not up to me to tell you what word to use to describe something that you're probably going to know way more about than a 67-year-old white woman who has led a different life. And I think even a small example like that can be an important start.
I agree. And I think we all draw upon a reflection of our lived experiences. And my lived
Mhm.
experience is going to be a little bit different than your lived experience, but no one or no less is any more valuable, because it's the collective.
Right.
I've had to deal with certain things that as a white woman you have not had to deal with, but you've
Yes.
had to deal with some things as a woman that I've never had to deal with as a man. And
Sure.
that's about those intersectionality of things that we have to always talk about as well,
Right.
and intersectional analysis of it. So um, I believe that we're moving in the right direction. I think the nation is changing. I think we can see from data and results and statistics that folks now are seeing that there's a problem.
Hmm.
And more people are seeing that there's a problem, but we need everyone to see that there's a problem. And
Agreed.
we need everyone to be championing this, and not just people of color. We need allies that are white to say, hey, we need to fix this, and we can fix this.
To talk a little bit about how libraries can help you in your effort. And I understand that you just got a grant from Amazon. Am I correct? And if so, can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So there have been several partnerships we've been able to establish with Amazon. The first partnership was the Right Now Needs Fund. And what that was a partnership with Amazon to where they were gifting $1 million between Alexandria and Arlington Public Schools, called the
Mhm.
Right Now Needs Fund, to where students who qualify are able to have access to a $100 gift code to be able to purchase the essential items. And it's not $100 per family, but $100 per student, to be able to have to purchase discretionary items from Amazon directly and have it delivered to their homes, whether it's food, clothing,
That's terrific.
uh, pretty much any item. Well, there's a listing of items, but they have that ability to purchase and make those purchases. Secondly, we just had for Black History Month, Amazon had a gift for Wakefield, and Wakefield was determined to be the recipient of that, to where there were 500 books of the book stamped
Mm.
by Ibram X. Kendi and Jason Reynolds. And with the balance of that, we're going to be able to utilize that for an honorarium. And what we plan on doing is to have a system-wide activity under our framework of No Place for Hate for all of our high schools to be able to have a virtual book tour or virtual lesson by Jason Reynolds shortly in the springtime.
Oh,
So
that's terrific.
very
Yeah.
excited about that partnership, and hopefully library services at the county level can also be involved in that.
We would love to. I mean, we have an author series called Arlington Reads. And over the years, we have featured a range of authors, Jacqueline Woodson, Jesmyn Ward, all kinds of authors who have, Zadie Smith a couple of years ago, which was an amazing conversation, Roxane Gay last year. So it's a range of authors who are talking about important things like racism and sexism and being left behind and not just Black, but from the Asian perspective and from Middle Eastern, et cetera. So on occasion, some of the APS students have attended the programs when they were in person. They were in person at the Central Library. But now that we're doing virtual, and will be probably for a bit longer, it would be great if some of your students could take advantage, because we really do get into, tough issues around, why this and why not that. And it was started with the intention of bringing important contemporary issues forward through literature, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, and starting community dialogues. That was the initial impetus when I started it 15 years ago. So let's think of ways that we can do that, because we would be happy to invite an author that might be more relevant or of interest to the high schoolers. And I know I'm not trying to make them a monolith. I know that their interests are all over the place, but it would be great if we could find some sweet spot where an author could talk to your students as well, and we could have what I used to call intergenerational conversations. Those are important too. So in terms of looking down the road, you have some great ideas about what you would like to do. You've talked very deliberately about first steps. You got to walk before you run. But say in a few years when you've been here and there's no more pandemic and things are more or less returned to normal, what does success start to look like for you?
So that's a big question. So, the superintendent asked me that question when we met for the first time. And my response was to be the first ever school system in the country to close their gaps as a system. That is the ultimate, to be able to say that we've reached educational equity when identity no longer predicts student outcomes would be the ultimate. And to be able to take that across the country and tell people how Arlington Public Schools did it, so that we can replicate it in other systems, in other school systems, because I think it's more than just us. I think this world is more than us, more than just us. And we shouldn't hold back information from one another, because we need to make our society better. And if we're able to do that, that would be my greatest accomplishment. And there's a lot of work to do, but I believe that we could do it. We have the resources here. We have the people here. We have the expertise to be able to do it. Also, what does it look like? So it also looks as though we're having these courageous conversations about race, about class. Also, what it looks like is when we can no longer say North Arlington or South Arlington.
Yes.
It's just Arlington.
Yes.
And all of our schools are wonderful schools. All of our schools are performing, and all of our schools have the resources, no matter what those resources are, and everyone receives a high quality education. So that to me is the goal.
Well, it's an exciting vision. What I also hear in your voice is passion for the topic. It's not just, well, this sounds good, or this is what we would like to do, but you have a passion for it, and from passion comes the commitment. So I have no doubt that you'll do whatever you can to bring about some of the change that you've been describing this afternoon. I want you to know, please, that we are a willing partner, both the county, because I do work pretty closely with Samia Bird and what she's trying to do, but also the library. I mean, I guess you all are over at the Syfax Center now, but it used to be across the street, so it was a little bit easier to get together. But please, when we return to a different level of normalcy, I call it the new now that we're trying to move into, I hope you'll consider us a friend and an ally, and a willingness, and see a willingness to help you do whatever you can, because your customers are also our customers. And if we're doing everything that we can, we lift all boats, and the community as a whole is better, and we can both work on that achievement gap, which would be a great thing to be able to boast about nationwide. As we wind down, I noticed that you're a Cincinnati Bengals fan. I read that somewhere. Okay, so I actually used to follow football a little bit more. I go back to the Boomer Esiason.
Okay.
And Sam Wyke. 1,000 years ago, I was a big Boomer fan. But I have to say, I have a staff person who's a Cleveland Browns fan. So
okay,
you might get you might get a little bit of rivalry going when football season starts again. And Ohio State, I also go back to the Woody Hayes era. Like, didn't he deck a student or something?
He did. He clotheslined him on the sideline. Yes.
Yeah, not great. Great.
We take football serious in Ohio, and from Columbus, Ohio State is the city. And we take losses hard, like to the point where people do not show up to work on Mondays, kind of hard.
Wow.
And in terms of Bengals, we haven't won anything in a long time. So we still show up to work even after a loss on Sundays in terms of Bengals. But Ohio State, and especially don't let us lose to Michigan, which fortunately has not happened in a lot of years.
Yeah.
At least not in football. But yeah, so I am a Bengals fan. I'm a Cincinnati Reds fan. I would love to be able to go to a baseball game here. I heard that the Nats Stadium is wonderful.
Gorgeous.
Gorgeous. So I would definitely look forward to being able to be outside and eat some peanuts and be in the sun deck a little bit. So
well, we might think about doing a joint trip, because a couple of years ago the Nats were our summer reading sponsor, and it was the year they won the full championship, and that was a thrill. And there was an event one evening there during the season where it was, the friends of the library and library staff, and it was a great evening. But then we were part of their parade when they won the championship. So it was a super, super, super big. I've lived in this area all my life, and I think we've got the Redskins had a couple of championships along the way. The Baltimore Bullets, which were now the Wizards, I guess, and then we've got the Nats, and the Nats, good ball club. So I hope we get a chance to, share some peanuts and have a toast to the return of baseball. I've really missed sitting in the stadium.
Well, I was hoping that Dusty Baker was going to stay with the Nats, and that was my guy. He was a great manager for the Reds, and you all had him for a while too. But I guess now he's moved on to greener.
Well, he's moved on. He's a classy guy. I watched him play when he was with the Dodgers a million years ago, back when the Dodgers and the Yankees had a real rivalry. And then I thought he was terrific. I thought it was a mistake for the Nats to let him go. He came so close, but that's baseball. And the Reds, I was a big Johnny Bench fan. Again, I mean, I'm talking baseball.
The big red machine, right? So
yes, the red machine.
Johnny Bench, Pete Rose.
Yes, Pete Rose. God, great ball club. Well, it was a real pleasure to talk with you today, Arron. I hope we can see great things from you. You have the energy and the passion, and it looks like you've got some really fresh ideas. So any way that we can help, please, please, please do not fail to reach out. We would love to work with you.
So let's work together on this piece with Amazon and making sure that we have the support needed to make sure it's successful for our students. So I look forward to working with you on that.
All right, well, we'll follow up and we'll figure out a plan, and we'll help you achieve your success. Again, your success is our success. So thanks very much and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. This weather is amazing.
More meetings, but please enjoy it for me, okay?
I'll do that. I'll do that. All right. Thank you, Arron.
All right.
Have a great evening.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.